You want to know a great way to get people to stop hating each other? Make them interact with each other. Have you ever been in a road rage moment? There's a reason why road rage is so common. It's because you are in isolated little boxes. You do not have that level of human interaction, which makes them more understandable to you and makes you more empathetic to them. And so little interactions that you see on the road turn into like these big deals because you do not have that level of connection with the person. It's the exact same thing when you are like in a separate but equal system.
There was a poll very recently that asked Israelis and Palestinians the question, do you think the other side wants to get rid of you, either to kill you or kick you out of the land? And I think 90% of both groups said yes. I think it was like slightly more Israelis than Palestinians, but it was about 90% each. Yeah, there's a lot of distrust between these two groups. So the idea that, and I think even if you look at polling on the one state for two people versus two states, or there was one poll that actually also inserted a third option, which was one state, but an unequal state without equal rights. And the order of preference for both groups was two states first, then one state that's unequal and undemocratic. And then the last option was one state for two people. So
yeah, I find that's the ironic part is like all these people who are talking about one state's the only solution. It's funny because the people who live there, none of them want one state. None of them. The Palestinians and the Israelis, nobody there wants one state. It's like because they understand that it's not a viable option. It's like a non-starter of a conversation. It just seems like.
Yeah, I mean, how come the North in the American Civil War didn't ask the plantation owners what they wanted to have happen with their slaves that they owned? Like, what the fuck are we talking about here? Why do we need to take into account the oppressor's opinion on what they want? Again, like apartheid in South Africa ended because of, in large part due to international pressures on the National Apartheid Party that caused them to bend to that. So if America pressured Israel, then Israel would bend to it. And you want to know a great way to get people to stop hating each other? Make them interact with each other. Have you ever been in a road rage moment? There's a reason why road rage is so common. It's because you are in isolated little boxes and you do not have that level of human interaction, which makes them more understandable to you and makes you more empathetic to them. And so like little interactions that you see on the road turn into like these big deals because you do not have that level of connection with the person. It's the exact same thing when you are like in a separate but equal system, which is what Ethan Klein is advocating for. Like, is Ethan Klein really going to, like, Ethan Klein would basically be the type of person that would support segregation in the Jim Crow South. Well, if you look at surveys, white people don't want to be assimilated with black people, and black people don't want to be assimilated with white people. So why are we trying to say that this system needs to end? Aren't you being a little bigoted by not asking the opinions of people that are living under segregation? Why aren't you taking their opinions into account? Again, extremely reactionary thinking from Ethan and a lack of understanding of the systems that create conflict, essentially.
Because they understand that it's not a viable option. It's like a non-starter of a conversation. It just seems like magical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to be that way forever. But again, Palestinians they need a state now. They don't need to wait 20 years before people start to absorb the same like multicultural opinions that we have in the West, right?
So how do you make a Palestinian state with like the way that the government is now, how they're like constantly absorbing land from the West Bank and kind of just looking the other way, or in some cases just greenlighting settlers to steal what is essentially Palestinian land?
That's a pretty big question. I think the international community and the support for Palestinians should be pointed a lot more in that direction. I think there were efforts not even that long ago that involved like boycotting of products that came from the settlements. I think it was like it eventually not too long ago led to European companies just refusing to stock any produce that came from settlements. And it resulted in expansion at least slowing down in some areas. And people said that, yeah, this is actually hurting our enterprise. So obviously more of that is a good thing. I think governments, I think it was a really good thing that Biden started putting sanctions on settlers and particular I think even maybe one or two settlements themselves, like the outposts. I think that kind of pressure is a really good thing. And I think I really wish that a lot of the activism was maybe pointed more in that direction, because to me, it's a much more black and white thing. I don't think anyone can defend settlers. I went to Israel and Palestine in the summer and interviewed people from both groups. The most frustrating conversations I ever had there was not with Palestinians who sympathized with resistance or anything like that. The frustrating conversations came from settlers, because on the one hand, they would do this thing where they would say, yeah, we're here because Israel's a small country and we need to expand our frontiers so it's harder for people to attack us, right? Like if we weren't here, the would be closer to Tel Aviv, right? It's a small country and all that kind of thing. But I would also they'd also talk about how this is historic Jewish land. This is Joseph's tomb and Rachel's and the tomb of the patriarchs. And I would try to ask this question where I'd say, like, okay, if the security issue was not a problem, would you give up this land for peace? And they wouldn't answer. Like, they would kind of skirt around the question. And I felt like such an idiot. I tried like 3 times to rephrase this question because I thought they just weren't understanding what I was trying to say, and they just still wouldn't answer. And it's, because those people they're expansionists. They just want territory. They don't care about the security. It's just something that is easier to sell to the rest of the world. So I think there's a lot that needs to change with regards to policy from Israel's allies. And I think settlements is a really big thing. I don't think it's the end of the world in terms of 2 states. I don't think land swapping was really the big issue in the peace process. I think the issues were more fundamental than that. But there are still, people, Israeli leftists who don't have any support behind the scenes talking about ways that you can fix the maps up to make this work. And I just think there needs to be a lot more pressure in that direction. And I think same with Palestinian leadership as well. I think if Palestinian resistance was about frustrating the settler enterprise compared to what is doing, then that would be a much more amazing thing.
That's a good point.
It's not a good point. I mean, is trying to frustrate the settler enterprise. And then when LonerBox is talking about how we need more pressure against the settlements, yes, we do. But guess what? The entire world is against the settlements. You know who's not against the settlements? Joe Biden. Like, he's letting Israel do whatever he wants. And guess what? Also, Donald Trump is going to let Israel annex the West Bank. So when we're talking about more pressure against settlements, we should boycott settlement-produced goods and services. That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. You know what we need to do is change the public opinion in the United States about this. So I just want to read this too because I'm a little bit interested. So what does this say? The Gaza Strip has been under military occupation by Israel since June 6, 1967, when Israeli forces captured the territory. In 2005, the UN, international human rights organizations, and several legal scholars regard the Gaza Strip to still be under military occupation by Israel, as Israel still maintains direct control over Gaza's air and maritime space, 6 of Gaza's 7 land crossings, a no-go buffer zone within the territory, and the Palestinian population registry. Wow, great. Palestine is so separate. I mean, one good thing about this conversation is that neither Ethan nor LonerBox is trying to pretend like Palestine is a free state right now. Like, they're admitting that Palestine is not a state. I want to see the disengagement. So what made them disengage from Gaza? While the disengagement of Israel from Gaza was first proposed in 2003 by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and adopted by the government and Knesset in 2004 and 5, the actual unilateral dismantlement of settlements occurred in 2005. The decision to disengage from Gaza was not met with support from the Israeli public, with a May 2004 referendum showing 65% of voters were against the disengagement plan. Well, why did they disengage then? By 2005, there were 9,000 Israeli settlers spread across 21 Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip, while around 1.3 million Palestinians lived there. The first settlement was built in 1970, soon after Israel occupied the Gaza Strip following the Six-Day War. Each Israeli settler disposed of 400 times the land available to the Palestinian refugees, and 20 times the volume of water allowed to the peasant farmers of the Strip. Following disengagement from the Gaza Strip in 2005, all Israeli settlers were evacuated and all settlements were dismantled. In late January 2024, it was reported by an unnamed Israeli military officer that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and others in the government had requested the military members begin to establish permanent bases in the Gaza Strip. So yeah, they're just invading that right now. Disengagement of Gaza Strip. Let's look at Britannica. So what's the background? So the cost of occupying the Gaza Strip weighed heavily on the Israeli public, especially amid rising casualties among soldiers who were deployed to defend the settlements. In 2002, the idea of evacuating the settlements before negotiations recommenced was floated by the leader of the Israeli Labor Party, then the largest party on the Israeli left. In 2003, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon embraced the idea, despite strong opposition within his own Likud party. That December, Sharon unveiled a plan for the complete removal of Israeli settlers and soldiers from the Gaza Strip. At the insistence of the United States, the plan later included the evacuation of 4 small settlements in the West Bank. So what are we seeing here? Well, the people in Gaza had violent resistance against the settlers, which Ethan supports, and also the United States was putting pressure on Israel to pull their settlements out of Gaza. And guess what? That pressure from both the Palestinians and the Americans caused Israel to actually stop being a little bit and colonial, and they did pull out of Gaza. So there was pressure on Israel in terms of the military and the expense of maintaining those settlements, and they were forced to pull out. So again, it's an example of actually working. And this is violence that LonerBox and Ethan Klein would actually support.
Well, are they doing anything to the settlers? Is that even like a focal point for like Hamas?
Sometimes, so yeah, there are lots of confrontations. The problem is that they tend to go for settlers, and at least in part.
So when was created? Let's just pull up the Wikipedia. So it's governed the Israeli occupied strip since 2007. So the Islamic Military Resistance Movement, abbreviated as Hamas. So I guess they emerged. Okay, what is this? The Hamas movement was founded by Palestinian Islamic scholar Ahmed Yassin in 1987. It emerged from his 1973. So in 2006 Palestinian legislative election, Hamas secured a majority. In the Battle of Gaza, they liberate Palestine from Israeli occupation. Egypt began its blockade of Gaza in 2007. This was followed by multiple wars with Israel, which began with the 7th. Okay, so anyway, like, has existed since 1987. So yeah, I'm sure they had a part in fighting against settlers to get rid of the occupation that was happening in Gaza.
Because they can't get to Israel. I think in, was it August? I think it was August this year, the end of the month, there was like an IDF raid into Jenin, like a big Hamas stronghold in the West Bank. And it's so stupid how these narratives get kind of like spun in the West. But I think the IDF went in there and they crossed quite a few lines. They bulldozed the roads and they caused quite a bit of destruction. But I don't think anyone, I watched a bunch of left-wing channels talking about this, and Al Jazeera and the rest of it. I don't think a single one of them mentioned that I think 11 people died in the first day of those raids. But I don't think a single outlet mentioned that every single one of those people who died was claimed by Islamic Jihad and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, like fighters, every single one of them, on their own websites. And they even said that what they were doing was they were building to use either on settler communities or on Israelis, because it happened just like a week after or 2 weeks after a botched attempt by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They tried one in Tel Aviv and it failed. So yeah, again, that's always been an issue, I think, is like, I don't really know if there's ever been like an armed resistance sort of agreement on the Palestinian side to kind of like focus on particular targets rather than others. It seems to be like they'll go for Israelis in Israel proper. They'll go for settlements that are right on the border that are probably never going to go back, or they'll go for outposters, which I think are a lot more justified. But yeah, I don't think there's ever been like a really focused
So if you're
attack
living
on one group. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious what your opinion is. If you're living in Gaza and you were born there, and obviously we all know that.
Okay, so what is this? Soldier and fierce clashes in Jenin as IDF presses major West Bank operation. Locals say they do not have access to water and electricity. Israel says at least 26 gunmen during operation. Palestinian groups have claimed 13 as their own. So 13 of the men that were Palestinian groups. Is this going to be a little bit more specific than Palestinian groups? So the slain soldier was named as Staff Sergeant Elkanah. So what was this? What was the operation that they were doing? So it says an Israeli soldier was killed and 3 others were wounded during fierce clashes with gunmen in the West Bank city of Jenin on Saturday morning. The IDF has been carrying out a major raid in the northern West Bank since early Wednesday. The action was now largely focusing on the Jenin area after raids in the Tulkarm and the Farah camp near Tubas concluded. According to initial IDF probe, troops carrying out a raid in Jenin encountered 2 gunmen considered to be prominent members of the group. The soldiers exchanged fire with the 2 operatives from close range, killing both of them. 4 soldiers were hit by the gunmen, including Nevan, who later died. One of the wounded troops, an officer, was listed in serious condition. They neutralized dozens of devices that were planted along the roads. We are dismantling the terrorism that comes from the refugee camps in Judea and Samaria. Halevi was quoted by the IDF as saying, "We are cut off from the world," Tahir al-Sadi, Jenin resident, told AFP. "The water is cut off, the electricity is cut off, the sewage system is no longer working, all the infrastructure is destroyed, we no longer have any services that work. The bakeries are at a standstill, we can't find milk for the children. I think it's the worst day since the start of the raid." Wissam Bakr, director of the Jenin Government Hospital, told AFP of the IDF's operations on Saturday, "We hear from time to time clashes and sometimes there's big. It's very hard for the children and for everyone. We are afraid. We are terrified. Look at all the damage," Jenin resident Faiza Abu Jafar told AFP as she stood amid piles of rubble. "We are living in dark days." Okay, so this is like an article kind of ripping into the IDF. The Israelis are besieging the hospitals and cutting off the city from the refugee camp. So far, amid the operation, launched earlier this week, the IDF says troops have killed at least 26 gunmen. So this is not on a single day, but I guess a single operation, and detained another 30 wanted Palestinians. The group Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have claimed 13 of those killed as their members, according to AFP. The situation in the West Bank was further escalated late Friday night when 2 cars exploded in the Gush Etzion area south of Jerusalem. 3 Israelis were hurt. Bro, Crimea River, when you're talking about 2 cars that hurt 3 Israelis, and yet there's like major things going on all the time in both the West Bank and in Gaza, from airplanes dropping like massive on buildings, and you're you're going to be writing that 3 Israelis were hurt and that's an escalation of the situation. Okay. So anyway, like I don't really understand the point of this. It's basically saying that is in the West Bank, like pushing back against Israeli occupation. Like, what was he trying to say there? Like,
policy from Israel's allies. And I think settlements is a really big thing. I don't think it's the end of the world in terms of 2 states. I don't think land swapping was really the big issue in the peace process. I think the issues were more fundamental than that. But there are still, people, Israeli leftists who don't have any support behind the scenes talking about ways that you can fix the maps up to make this work. And yeah, I just think there needs to be a lot more pressure in that direction. And I think same with Palestinian leadership as well. I think if Palestinian resistance was about frustrating the settler enterprise compared to what doing, I think that would be a much more amazing thing.
That's a good point. Well, are they doing anything to the settlers? Is that even like a focal point for like?
Sometimes, so yeah, there are lots of confrontations. The problem is that they tend to go for settlers, at least in part because they can't get to Israel. I think in, was it August? I think it was August this year, the end of the month, there was an IDF raid into Jenin, like a big Hamas stronghold in the West Bank.
Okay, so just one thing. This is by the Times of Israel. LonerBox calls this a big stronghold. What is the quote? We're dismantling the that comes from the refugee camps in Judea and Samaria. During the raid on the Jenin refugee camp on Saturday, the IDF said troops neutralized dozens of explosive devices that were planted along the roads. So, no, this isn't a Hamas stronghold. This is a refugee camp. I mean, insane amount of disinformation coming from this guy.
And it's so stupid how these narratives get kind of like spun in the West. But I think the IDF went in there and they crossed quite a few lines. They bulldozed the roads and they caused quite a bit of destruction. But I don't think I watched a bunch of left-wing channels talking about this and Al Jazeera and the rest of it. I don't think a single one of them mentioned that I think 11 people died in the first day of those raids. And I don't think a single outlet mentioned that every single one of those people who died was claimed by Islamic Jihad and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, like fighters, every single one of them, on their own websites. And they even said that what they were doing was they were building to use either on settler communities or on Israelis, because it happened just like a week after or 2 weeks after a botched attempt by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They tried one in Tel Aviv and it failed. Yeah, again, that's always been an issue, I think. Is like, I don't really know if there's ever been like an armed resistance sort of agreement on the Palestinian side to kind of like focus on particular targets rather than others. It seems to be like they'll go for Israelis in Israel proper. They'll go for settlements that are right on the border that are probably never going to go back, or they'll go for outposters, which I think are a lot more justified. But yeah, I don't think there's ever been like a really focused
so if you're
attack on one group. Yeah.
So his criticism is that is firing rockets into Israel, or that they haven't had like a single target that they're only targeting. This is so dumb. Like, why are you criticizing someone? Why are you criticizing? So let's just stick to why are you criticizing for having a diverse array of targets? Like, this is the same kind of person that would criticize Ukraine for, oh, well, you shot a missile base that's inside of Russia. And I know that the missile launching pad would shoot missiles at you back, but that's too far. Like, you should stick to just targeting Russian soldiers that are inside of Ukraine. You shouldn't blow any bridges. You shouldn't target any military installations that are inside of Russia, because that's a war crime, right? So dumb. Ethan has even said that settlers are a valid military target. Like, he literally said that in this conversation with LonerBox. And then just one last thing. I mean, LonerBox said 11 people, but no one talked about how they're all fighters or all resistance fighters. Well, that's not what this article says. This article says that so far amid the major operation launch earlier this week, the IDF says troops have killed at least 26 gunmen and detained another 30 wanted Palestinians. The groups Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have claimed 13 of those as their members. So that means 13 that were not claimed by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Maybe there were just random Palestinians in the West Bank trying to resist a violent occupying force. And again, this guy LonerBox said that was justified. He said it was justified if someone walked up with a gun to settlers and was like, get out of my land, get out of my land, I have a gun, go, go, go. And so it looks like 13 people did try that and they got. And he's like, no one talks about how all of these people that died were Hamas members. Well, isn't that a good thing, because the Hamas members were pushing back against settlers? Like, these guys do not have any kind of solid position on any of these things. But anyway, we're halfway through this conversation between Ethan Klein and LonerBox. I am going to end it for today. I hope you guys can appreciate that I'm really going through this in detail and trying to fact check as much as possible. These two morons, they are spreading a lot of disinformation. So I appreciate you watching, because I'm trying to correct the record on a lot of what they're saying. And yeah, I hope that you like the formats the format of this video that I'm going through. Like, there's no one really going through every single minute of this content, and that's why I started this channel, so that I can comb through this in painstaking detail. But let me know what you thought I did well. Let me know if you missed anything. Let me know what you think I can do differently for part 2. See you then.